Hello and welcome to our Telesummit and Podcast Series on preventing cancer. I'm your host, Jenny Lamorgan, owner of greenwomanstore.com, where we enjoy creating educational tools like this podcast series on topics important to us as women. I'm excited to be here with our guest, Connie Engel. She's Science and Education Manager at the Breast Cancer Fund. Connie will share with us the science of preventing breast cancer, how we can reduce our risk, and how to get involved in exposing and eliminating the environmental causes of breast cancer. This Telesummit is about our health. It's about our politics, what we know and what we need to know about cancer, and about preventing cancer and its recurrence. It's about medical practices, our environment, and our science. We've invited women experts whose passion it is to educate and encourage other women toward health and political action. So let me introduce you to our guest, Connie Engel. At the Breast Cancer Fund, Connie works to prevent, the Breast Cancer Fund works to prevent cancer by eliminating our exposure to toxic chemicals and radiation linked to the disease. Connie's work at the Breast Cancer Fund focuses on translating science to policymakers and the public in ways that are clear, relevant, and engaging. She has created programs that use cutting-edge technology to explore and explain the science and policy around breast cancer and the environment. She earned her PhD in 2010 from Arizona State University's School of Social Transformation, where she studied the juncture of science and advocacy in the breast cancer movement. Welcome, Connie, and thank you very much for your work at the Breast Cancer Fund and for sharing the science of preventing breast cancer with us today.
Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to join you.
And I love that the Breast Cancer Fund has been advancing the discussion from awareness of cancer to prevention for a very long time. And why has this been the Breast Cancer Fund's focus? I think we're all just starting to refocus a little bit, but you all have been doing it for a long time.
Well, I think part of it goes back to our founder in 1992, and when Andrea Ravenette Martin founded the breast cancer, one of her goals was to focus on aspects of the disease that were not being focused on by other organizations. And at that time, the mission included a lot of different visions and approaches because there were a lot of gaps in the discussion around breast cancer. And in 2001, we went through a strategic planning process and decided to focus exclusively on the environment, meaning chemicals and radiation in the environment that are linked to the disease. And so since 2001, we've been exploring those ideas and the idea of prevention, which was, very much part of our foundation, although not exclusively so until that point.
And I'm so glad you are, because it is a big gap, I think, at least in the information that we see in the public. What is the percentage of breast cancers caused from environmental toxins? I've heard anywhere from 50 to 90%.
Well, so that's actually a very difficult question to answer because in many cases, environment is defined very, very broadly. Sometimes it is defined as everything that's not genetic. And of course, we also know that genes and environment interact. For instance, over the last several decades, we've seen an increase even in breast cancers among women who have BRCA mutations, which confer a relatively high risk of breast cancer, but their risk even has increased. So that has to be some kind of interaction with the environment in that definition writ large. We don't know whether that is, diet or behaviors or exposures to chemicals and radiation. So the research can't quite pinpoint a number, but what we do know is that no more than about 40% of breast cancers can be explained by what's considered the known risk factors. And so those remain, the other 60% remain unexplained and can't be described by things like family history, reproductive status, diet and things like that. So there's a big gap there, and we certainly suspect that a significant proportion of that unexplained bit is due to the kinds of environmental exposures that we talk about.
Wow, that's a big percentage. So as a Science and Education Manager at the Breast Cancer Fund, can you give us an idea and a better understanding of the biology of breast cancer?
Well, so again, that's a really, really huge question, of course, and that could start with anything from breast development to how tumors start and grow and progress. I want to talk actually about a couple of really important things that shape what we talk about. One is first that breast cancer is not a single disease. Increasingly, we are learning that breast cancer is actually multiple diseases that have different characteristics at the molecular level and different prognosis, different responses to specific treatments and things like that. Indeed, recent studies in the last couple of years have shown that these different kinds of breast cancers actually also have different genetic characteristics. If they do the genomic sequence for those tumors, they find actually that the ones that have similar behaviors in one particular way also share a lot of overlap in their genetics, and they look different than other subtypes. So right now there are roughly 5 different subtypes that are discussed. There might well be more. And so if we're looking at both the causes of breast cancer as well as treatments that might be effective for breast cancer, we really need to look at them as these distinct diseases, because if we cluster them all together, let's say we cluster 5 of them together and then look at does X thing, and that could be anything, cause breast cancer. If it only causes one of them, we actually might not see any kind of statistical effect because it's washed out by the 4 that are not linked to that cause, if that makes any sense. So different subtypes of breast cancer and focusing our research more specifically to look at those distinctly is a very important aspect of the biology and how it shapes our understanding. Another is that the breast develops, beginning in utero. The very basic cells are set down quite early in development and can be affected by exposures to environmental chemicals and radiation that the mother experiences. And that alterations in breast development may predispose to later life breast cancer. Much of that research has happened in animal studies where they have looked at breast development in mostly rodents, but not exclusively, and being able to see predisposition for mammary tumors later in life as a result of changes very, very early in development. And the breast continues to develop into puberty and even throughout pregnancy and lactation. And indeed, the breast doesn't even fully mature until it has lactated and fed an infant. So it remains actually quite poised in this sort of ready-to-go state for a long time, especially if women are having children later and later, or not at all. And then finally, the endocrine system is really fundamental and key in shaping breast development. And one of the concerns we have are for endocrine disrupting compounds that throw off essentially the hormones in the body and how they very precisely orchestrate breast development, and indeed many, many other functions in our bodies.
And we're certainly becoming more and more aware of endocrine disruptors and hormone disruptors in so many products on the shelves today. So that term, I think, used to be something that was more of a scientific term, and it's really becoming pretty mainstream.
Yes, absolutely. And much of the research on that is really quite new. It's a term and a focus that's emerged in the last, let's say 15 to 20 years. And it's actually pretty impressive how quickly it's made it into, at least, the public vernacular for some of us.
Thanks to organizations like yours, doing that important work. So when we talk about breast cancer, we're certainly talking about toxins, but we're also talking about radiation. So can you talk about exposure to radiation and where those sources would be? Is it our cell phones, our x-rays, our mammograms? What is the danger out there in regards to radiation?
Well, so radiation is not all created equal. We are quite concerned about ionizing radiation, which is the kind of radiation that we see in x-rays, CT scans, mammography, so all of those medical imaging, kind of techniques, as well as that's the same radiation that is released from, atomic bombs and from radon and things like that. And so we know from studies, really decades of research, that when younger women in particular are exposed to ionizing radiation, there is an increased risk for breast cancer. And that is, ionizing radiation is the best and longest studied environmental exposure for breast cancer. So that's a very important risk. And so studies from even the atomic bombs tragically dropped in Japan at the end of World War II let us know that women who were basically younger than 20 at the time those bombs were dropped had elevated rates of breast cancer. Women who were older than that did not. So we know that there are vulnerabilities early in life to ionizing radiation. And certainly we've seen that replicated due to different kinds of medical exposures that girls have faced for things like scoliosis, treatment early in life for lymphomas and other blood diseases and things like that. And so there's quite a robust bit of data on that. As far as mammography goes, there are loads and loads of discussions happening out there around mammography. And the concern is really for a specific subset of women, and that is high-risk women, particularly those with either of the BRCA mutations, who begin screening early in life. And there is recent data that the mutations that lead them to start this screening early may also predispose them to be particularly vulnerable to the cancer-inducing effects of early and repeated exposures to mammograms. So, in other words, a couple of studies starting in 2009 or so have found that women who got repeated early mammograms and were particularly vulnerable had dose-dependent increases in breast cancer. Now, for other women, especially women when they start screening at 50, as is now recommended by the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, those risks might look really different and be quite a lot lower. So for young women who are at high risk, it's very important that they consider and talk with their doctors about alternative screening like MRI and ultrasound, which is becoming more and more the common approach for them.
And thermography I've heard of as well as an alternative. Can you speak a little bit about thermography and what's the science behind it?
Well, so I think there's been a lot of hope that we would find alternative screening methods that could replace mammography, and as a result, a lot of people talk about this idea of thermography, which sounds great. In theory, it's that there's a lot of cellular activity and possibly, therefore, metabolic and, more heat in areas where there might be a tumor. Unfortunately, the research looking at thermography accuracy for screening shows that it's, relatively poor, at finding cancers when they're there, and also tends to find a lot of false positives. In other words, it's neither accurate nor sensitive at detecting breast cancers. So better alternatives are probably ultrasound and MRI, which are pretty effective, especially for younger women. Although they can still detect some false positives, they are non-invasive, don't have the risks of radiation, and therefore might be better. Certainly it's a question that women should discuss robustly with their physicians when screening is recommended for them.
All right, thank you for that. So we've talked a little bit about the radiation and the chemicals. Can you talk more about the chemicals that are actually linked to breast cancer and the findings that BCF works with?
Yes, so certainly I could talk for hours and hours and hours on that, but I'll just refer people to our Clear Science section of our website. So if you go to breastcancerfund.org/clearscience, there is a whole section where we deeply review many, many different chemicals linked to breast cancer and our concerns about them. And some of them have very robust evidence, others have emerging evidence, and our job is to really try to describe the strength of that evidence in clear ways, and even conflicts that might arise in the different scientific studies. So where those exist, we do highlight them. And in some cases, if you're reading deeply into them, you might find that there are things like non-ionizing radiation, where the links look pretty limited and may not be there at all based upon the current evidence, whereas ionizing radiation, it's very strong. So, for instance, in that realm. So there are two kinds of chemicals that we look at. There are those that are really frank carcinogens. They are described by agencies like the National Toxicology Program or the International Agency for Research on Cancer as cancer-causing chemicals, and those two agencies actually designate different levels of the strength of the evidence on those, which we highlight. And then there are also the endocrine disrupting compounds, where we recap the range and scope of evidence on any number of chemicals. Those include pesticides, things added to plastics or making up plastics, different kinds of things in cleaning products and personal care products and things like that. So quite a big range of chemicals that we explore.
All right. And are there other exposures that we should be more concerned about when we're pregnant or perhaps for our children?
Sure. So one of the things that I have alluded to are with both endocrine disrupting compounds and radiation in particular. We know that earlier life exposures in particular can set an individual up for higher risks later in life, whether that's in response to later additional exposures or changes in mammary gland development that alter the growth over the lifespan. It's this idea of the developmental onset of health and disease, that these things start very, very early. So for endocrine disrupting compounds in particular, here are these chemicals that in certain low doses may look to our body particularly like the body's own hormones. And those, our own hormones operate at very, very low dose levels. So low doses of these chemicals, I suppose it's no surprise, can look more to the body like they are hormones. And since hormones are specifically quite active with regard to breast development early in life, during prenatal development and then later during puberty and then into pregnancy and lactation, at those periods in particular, hormone disrupting compounds may have particularly profound effects at those particular life stages. And of course, two of those that I highlighted are during pregnancy or during prenatal development and puberty, so childhood and pregnancy.
And so could this be accounting to with some of the, very marked increase in men with breast cancer?
Can you ask that question again?
The hormone disruptors that we're exposed to as children, there's so much plastic in a child's life. I'm just wondering about the new occurrences of men with breast cancer now.
Oh, male breast cancer.
Yes.
Yes. Certainly some, concerns about hormone disruption, definitely with them. And also, some of the cases that we're hearing about, particularly the Camp Lejeune, they were particularly exposed to some key solvents like, let me see if I can get this word right. It's abbreviated TCE, and it's trichloroethylene that was at high levels in a particular military base. And so some of those exposures are of particular concern for them.
And that's a known carcinogen, yeah.
When I'm doing some very rapid, yes, it's definitely a known carcinogen, or a carcinogen. I don't remember quite how the strength of the evidence is rated. I can probably tell you that in just a couple of moments. But we can come back to that if you want to ask me some other questions. I'll look it up.
And so I'm just wondering if there are statistics for breast cancer by race and class, occupation, genetic makeup, that kind of thing. Are there statistics on your website?
There are some statistics certainly on race, ethnicity, and class. Some very serious concerns that have emerged where we're seeing different rates. If you go back to quite a lot earlier in this conversation where I talked about different subtypes of breast cancer, we're seeing elevated rates of what's called triple negative breast cancer among young African American women and also Latina women. And this is a particularly aggressive, difficult to treat kind of breast cancer, and we don't know why it's occurring at these elevated rates in these particular populations. At the same time, it is actually white women who have the highest overall rates of breast cancer, but we are seeing that the rates of mortality are, overall declining for all populations, but they're declining much more slowly for African American women, which is another very puzzling and quite concerning statistic. One that needs further investigation to understand why that's happening, and then, of course, to go all the way back to prevention, to prevent that from occurring, and then also efficacy in detection and treatment among that population. As far as occupation goes, there are definitely occupations with elevated rates of breast cancer, particularly those who work with chemicals, with ionizing radiation, with the various solvents, and we are actually working on pulling together some of that evidence, and we'll have more specific stuff to talk about with that later next year.
Okay, great. I know I just saw something come across Facebook recently about the goalies, young women, college age, having actually the goalies as a profession having higher rates of cancer now because of the fields that they're playing on and the pieces of rubber tires that actually make it better to play on than actual turf. So I think there's a lot coming out all the time, new science, new information, new studies that we're all discovering and concerned about. So the awareness is up and the prevention is where we're taking it. I'm so glad to hear you talk about all of these subjects. So there's low-dose exposures that we're probably not aware of, and I'm wondering about flame retardants being in this category, that flame retardants in our couches, in our beds, in our sleepwear, that kind of thing.
Certainly, the low-dose exposures are particularly for those chemicals that are linked to endocrine disruption, which many of the flame retardants, particularly the polybrominated flame retardants, are part of, and those have mostly at this point been phased out, but they are a low-dose exposure concern, and even though they're phased out of being put into new products, they were in the kinds of products that we keep for a long time. And their replacements are often what we call regrettable substitutions, meaning that you replace one bad thing with something that's equally bad or potentially worse. And many of those are probably share a lot of characteristics, both because that's what makes them effective in the same way, but it also means they probably have many of the same hazards and concerns. So yeah, flame retardants are one of those low-dose exposures. Now, we're dwelling on a lot of the difficult stuff around this, and flame retardants partly break down from the foam in our furniture and things like that, and they end up in our household dust. And there are actually studies that show washing your hands can reduce exposure to flame retardants because you wash off that dust that's in your house or your office or whatever. And of course, as we come up on flu season, that's something we're encouraged to do anyway. So washing your hands reduces exposures to what's in your dust as well as to all of those germs floating around. So that's good. But don't use triclosan, because triclosan is another hormone disruptor. So just plain old soap and water will do the trick. And
triclosan is in the antibacterial soaps.
Yes, yeah, and it's very clearly labeled on hand soaps because it is considered an active ingredient. And the FDA even did some research and found that there's no real benefit compared to the antibacterial effects of those soaps, yet you've added a pretty serious thyroid disrupting endocrine disruptor to those. So plain old soap and water will totally do the trick.
Thank you. So when it comes to beauty products, the Breast Cancer Fund is a leader in advocacy efforts to get toxic chemicals out of cosmetics. Can you tell us about the Breast Cancer Fund's campaign for safe cosmetics?
Yes, absolutely. So the campaign for safe cosmetics has been around for a little over a decade at this point, and Breast Cancer Fund was one of the founding members of that campaign. And it basically is focused on understanding overall the cosmetics, the chemicals in cosmetics that are linked to various health effects. Of course, as the Breast Cancer Fund, we're particularly interested in the ones that are in there linked to breast cancer, but there are quite a lot of different health concerns that are linked to some of the chemicals widely used in cosmetics that are on the store shelves all over the place. Right now we are working on a campaign in October, and that is focused on cosmetics without cancer. And we're focused right now on Procter & Gamble. And if you go to safecosmetics.org, you can learn all about the different chemicals that we found in their products and why we're concerned about them. I think it's particularly interesting that we found some specific things like butylated hydroxyanisole BHA in some mascaras. That's a carcinogen. Titanium dioxide, which actually is, great in like a sunscreen cream. It's not considered a carcinogen when it's not inhalable, but when it is in a powder and therefore inhalable, it is considered by several different regulatory and authoritative bodies to be a carcinogen. And we found it in powders and eyeshadows and blushes that are both loose and pressed powders. So, that becomes then an inhalable thing. A lot of preservatives that release formaldehyde, which is a known carcinogen. In addition, we found 2 ingredients that are likely contaminated with carcinogens, and I think one of these is especially interesting, polytetrafluoroethylene, or PTFE, which is basically the same thing used to coat Teflon pans, right, nonstick pans, in anti-aging creams and shaving creams. That's because it creates such a smooth surface. And then also polyacrylamide, also in some different creams and anti-aging creams, which can be contaminated with the carcinogen acrylamide. So that's our current work in there, but there is a whole decade of work that you can find at safecosmetics.org to learn more about that.
Wow, it's such a, great results with very little concern given to the health effects of these ingredients. And I know that there's a lot of products that are sold in Europe that don't contain the kinds of toxic chemicals that are in our products made by the same manufacturers here in the United States. So I think we're a little behind the times about being educated and demanding safer products. So thank you so much for your work for a campaign for safe cosmetics.
There's definite truth to the fact that sometimes, the companies are formulating differently for different countries, but at the same time, the growth in the, safer options in cosmetics has been tremendous. And we did a report, I think it was about 2 years ago now, called Market Shift, where we've seen just tremendous growth and interest from the public in safer options. And as a result, those have popped up all over the place, and it's becoming more and more accessible for folks to be able to find safer options and, get a hold of them. Even if you don't live in the Bay Area like I do, just really terrific to have all of those alternatives at people's fingertips. If folks are interested, there's an app called Think Dirty that you can get for iPhone, and I think it's they almost have or maybe just released an Android version. And basically you can scan the barcodes of all the products in your bathroom, and it will give you safer options that you can find online and all around. So there are ways to definitely address that individually, and then of course be part of the voice for change, calling for different companies and laws to be changed and fixed.
That's right. We are changing manufacturing practices every day. I get emails and Facebook posts about new changes that are coming across because we're standing up and voicing our opinions with our shopping dollars. That's how we are making change too. And we have several non-toxic cosmetic companies, women-owned businesses on Green Woman Store that make amazing, safe products, and that's their passion. So,
yes.
To eliminate environmental causes of cancer, prevention has to be a public health priority, along with early detection and improving treatment and finding a cure. Can you talk to us about how the Breast Cancer Fund works to help craft good public policy that prioritizes prevention?
Absolutely. So if people want to dive really deeply into this question, they can read a report that was released in February 2013, and I'm going to give you a whole bunch of letters right now, from the Interagency Breast Cancer and Environmental Research Coordinating Committee, IBCERCC, or IBIZERC as we fondly called it. And this was a committee put together from all over the country, advocates and scientists and agency folks, really looking at what we know about preventing breast cancer and environmental links. And that committee, maybe the most important thing to come out of their report, was this fundamental idea that prevention is the key to reducing the burden of breast cancer, and that those burdens go beyond women getting sick, men getting sick even, and people dying from the disease, because survivorship too brings burdens, changes in people's bodies, their experiences, fears of recurrence, which are, genuine and real, and all of the long-term sequelae of going through the very, very often arduous treatments for the disease. Right, so the burden is really quite vast when 1 in 8 women is diagnosed in her lifetime, and all of those different outcomes occur. And so we look at public policies that can create change here, and those policies have to be ones that basically raise the floor of safety for everyone. One of my colleagues talks about this quite often. Shifts in the market, they raise the ceiling. They give us better and better, more and more safer options that do the kinds of things we're used to, whether that's for our laundry detergent or our face cream or our shampoo, with fewer or no chemicals of concern. So the market raises the ceiling. But it's only laws that can raise the floor so that everybody, regardless of how much money they make, where in the country they live, their ability to pick up a bottle and read a tiny label, that everyone is protected and their exposures to these chemicals are reduced. So the laws we advocate attempt to do that very thing, to eliminate carcinogens, mutagens, reproductive toxins, hormone disruptors from the whole scope of products that we really encounter in our day-to-day lives, as well as occupationally, whether it's farm workers or firefighters or healthcare providers that folks are encountering in their day-to-day work as well.
Important work. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the successes of the Breast Cancer Fund and some of the campaigns that you've done.
Oh, sure. There are, some really, really great stories actually that are part of the neat things that we've gotten to see happen. One of the big ones was, getting Johnson & Johnson to commit to safer cosmetics worldwide. And so, basically they committed to phasing out chemicals linked to cancer and other health problems from first its baby products and then from adult products across the world. And that was just absolutely tremendous. And they've set a high bar for, their competitors to meet by making those changes. And then in the same year, earlier that year, Campbell's Soup announced a goal to phase bisphenol A out of food cans. And that, again, was absolutely tremendous. And that has led to similar commitments across the canned food industry, although we'd love to know from all of them what it is they're replacing the bisphenol A with. Certainly we've seen that in some cases they're moving away from cans, completely. And you can see soups in pouches and boxes and things like that that don't require the same kind of coating. So that's terrific. Sometimes it's not that you take a chemical out and put something else in. Sometimes you develop an entirely new solution, and you don't need that chemical.
And
so those are two of the most phenomenal victories in recent years.
And your Cans Not Cancer campaign is still going.
Yes, and so right now where we're really focused is on learning more and understanding more about the kinds of alternatives companies are using to replace bisphenol A. And truthfully, it's quite that's a challenging question to take on, because there are, fairly serious gaps in the laws that govern what can be used in packaging additives. These are, the FDA calls these indirect food additives. And those laws are so inadequate that things like formaldehyde and phthalates can be used in food packaging. Vinyl chloride can be used in food packaging at very small levels. And so these huge gaps make it really difficult. Plus, there is no requirement for disclosure of what they're using. There is a voluntary registration that people can do with the FDA, but again, it's voluntary. So the data gaps and gaps in disclosure are significant, and we're trying to work on that issue. One of the keys there is that, we have a right to know as consumers what is in the linings of the cans that we're buying our food in, what's in the fragrances that are in our cleaning products, what's in the fragrances in our personal care products. And so with the canned food issue, what we're trying to understand now is how can we get people that knowledge that they absolutely have the right to.
Thank you for that, because I don't know any other organized effort to try to figure out what is replacing BPA, because we're seeing BPA-free products out there, but also at the same time hearing that the alternatives are worse. So I'm glad that you're on top of that issue and trying to figure that out and make some change in that and bring some clarity to it.
Yes, and that is a slow and arduous process. It's a tough nut to crack, but we'll keep at it for sure.
Thank you very much. So, Connie, how can we act for change? How can we make a difference beyond our own home and our families? How can we add our voice to the chorus, calling for environmental health protections?
So certainly I think by signing up to get the Breast Cancer Fund and Campaign for Safe Cosmetics e-news alerts. If you go to either website, there's a place to add your email and get updates on what's going on. And we don't send a ton of email, probably tops a couple per month, but let you know what's up, what's happening, what's interesting in this world of safer products and social action, and quite often we'll send out action alerts and ways that people can sign on to, whether it's a petition or to write Congress or to write a company. And those voices, that consumer pressure and, constituents pressure really is something that people listen to. So just join us, join our efforts, be part of the effort to move toward prevention and to remove environmental chemicals and toxic chemicals from all of these different things.
Thank you very, very much, Connie Engel, Science and Education Manager at the Breast Cancer Fund, for being with us today and to educate us and to let us know about the important work being done on all of our behalf by the Breast Cancer Fund. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with today before we close?
I think just that if I look back, I've been here for about 7 years, and over the course of that time, what we talk about at first kind of felt like people were like, oh, wow, I've never really thought about this before. And now 7 years later, the light bulb's on. People are really, really ready for this. And if we all work together and continue pressuring companies to do the right thing and, getting our lawmakers at the local, at the state, at the federal level to pass really smart laws, in 7 more years, we could be somewhere amazing with all of these issues. We could really magnify the changes that we're starting to see happen and have so much safer products that we're bringing into our homes, our offices, our workspaces, our children's lives. And I think that is just really inspiring. We're poised for a real, you could call it the second chemical revolution, and this one's going to be toward green chemistry and safer alternatives and much, much more transparency. So join us because it's really exciting over here.
I love that term, green chemistry. That's really kind of brings us full circle.
Yes, absolutely.
So many of the chemicals are trying to mimic natural compounds, and so now we're really taking it back to where we started in the market.
Yes, absolutely. And those are chemicals. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right, and you can learn more about Connie's work at the Breast Cancer Fund at breastcancerfund.org and safecosmetics.org. And follow the work of the Breast Cancer Fund on Facebook, and also Beyond Pink, From Awareness to Prevention. We'll have a link up for that page on the website. So thank you again, Connie Engel, Science and Education Manager at the Breast Cancer Fund, and we thank everyone at BCF for your advocacy and for your science. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, you too. Thank you, Connie. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I hope that we have informed and inspired you in ways that improve your health and longevity. If you're looking for new ideas and the latest information on breast cancer, please try to catch more of our podcasts on preventing cancer, green lifestyles, and sustainable and sustained living. And please share the interviews with your friends and family. You never know who you may be helping. I hope you will take the time to make the healthy changes you heard about today a priority in your life. Keep listening. Bye for now.